To weather routing. We're going to introduce Eva Tanner. She was here earlier today on the women's panel. You may have heard a little bit from her. She's got tons of experience. I can attest to that. Even I sailed from South Africa to Florida. Took us 57 days. Had a great time. And Eva is our weather router. Eva's done a lot of deliveries up and down the West Coast, and that's where you really, really need to know what's going on with the weather. So we're going to queue up Eva here in a minute. We ready to go over there? All right, we're ready to go.
And welcome to virtual weather routing. Here's a little bit about myself. My name is Eva Tanner, and no, I'm not a meteorologist, and yes, my accent is German. After 31 years working in the medical field, I decided to go for the Merchant Mariner accreditation with a sailing and towing endorsement. 40 years I've been sailing approximately, and 25 years living aboard. Also, I am lucky enough to have a daughter who shares the passion for the seas. This slide shows a typical summer day on lively San Francisco Bay. Judging from the water, we must have had an outgoing tide and strong westerly winds against us. While looking how I best can explain the basic weather or meteorology, I found this basic explanation for weather in one of my study books. The takeaway here is, generally, weather refers to day-to-day temperature and precipitation activity. The sun is the world's main weather generator by heating our world. The sun's energy warms the air, our oceans, and the land. Understanding this is important to the mariner. Wind and sea affects that reckoning. Reduced visibility limits piloting, and the atmosphere affects electronic and radio communication. Overcast limits celestial navigation. Thus, operating in an uncontrolled environment, the mariner must be familiar with sudden changes in weather and conditions, meaning effectively utilizing a variety of methods or tools of predicting and of tracking. For this, I use a variety of tools, such as a local tide log, digital forecasts, grip files, as well as paper and pen for basic calculations. Knowledge and planning. These things can make or break your trip, for you, for your guests, for your vessel. And this picture was taken heading to the Pacific Northwest in cold, wet, and sloppy conditions. We already planned, though, which ports would serve as a refuge harbor should we ever need to. And as it happens to be, we did need to go to Newport to find refuge from the weather. I separate things into 5 categories when planning a trip. One is warnings, 2 is winds, 3 is weather, 4 is waves, and 5 tides and currents. By looking at these 5 items, I can expect to make reasonable predictions and take adequate precautions. Can you cook, eat, or sleep? This picture is coming across the Atlantic Ocean from Cape Town, South Africa to Florida. Yes, we adapted to weather conditions. We cooked, we ate well, we slept, and we returned with fantastic memories and lessons. If we saw that weather was deteriorating, we prepared meals ahead of time so it was fast and easy for us to have available. So, let's start with warnings. We will expect to see some changes from small craft advisory to be changed to small craft warnings. Warnings are depending on who says what and what are your beliefs. It could be anything from do not leave the harbor or your port with a banana, always throw a penny over your shoulder when departing on a port, or never leave on a Friday, or red sky in the morning, sailor take warning, red sky at night, sailor's delight. And this last one is basically because the weather moves in general west to east. The warning on this slide, and you can see this, it's the application, an app, Windy, and shows focused in Richmond, Berkeley area, San Francisco Bay. We can see the time, the weather, the temperature. Then in the blue and green lines, your average wind at whatever hour. And then below is the orange, reddish, yellowish line, which are your wind gusts. Below this, the arrows, which show you the direction the wind is coming from. So my warning to this slide would be that roughly about 3 p.m., I would not necessarily want to be out because I see 24 knots of wind. This is a warning to me. I don't necessarily look for this, particularly if it was sustained. Winds, our next category. You have different classification of wind. So this is a slide of a zoomed out windy picture. You see 28 knots of wind. If I click on the orange circle with the arrow pointing down, I will get the same reference as in the previous slide of a 5 to 7 day forecast of what to expect, weather, wind directions, gusts, etc. So the question now is that I will take a look at, can I be in front of this weather system? Where is it moving to? Do I need to be closer? As I zoom in, I can see probably a little bit less wind where the green areas are than out right in front of the Channel Islands. If you look at your winds, breezy up to 25 knots. Now, if you're out, small crafts warning would be up to 33 knots. Probably we can all deal with that. Reasonable sized boat, obviously not in a dinghy or an open craft, small kayak kind of a vessel. But it doesn't take much to get into gale force winds. Would you choose to be out there for that? So from 33 knots to 34 to 47, it's not inconceivable that you can have some gusts occurring during, particularly between islands. In short, that picture would be a no thank you for me kind of a condition. Now, before you leave the land, you may want to look at your land wind meter. By that, you can refer to what are the trees, the leaves, or the branches doing? Are they just rustling? How strong do they move? Are the branches swinging and swaying? Take a look at that before you enter the gate, then you may be able to anticipate something to expect. So you might be able to read the trees, but can you read a weather map? If you look at the bars, you see short and longer bars, and it goes in 5 knots. 10 knots is the longer bars. You add a long bar and a short bar, you have 15 knots. And in the example here, written in blue in the square, you would read this as 25 knots because you have 2 long ones and 1 short one. 10 and 10 and 5 makes 25. And the direction it is pointing to is northwest winds. Knowing that, and if you look at the chart, grip files, anything like that, you're able to determine what's coming and what's heading your direction. Looking at this picture of the grip files, you can see on the left side that the circles, the lines, are somewhat smaller together than to the right. You can also see that you have 40 knots of wind because you have 4 long bars. The outer part of the circles have 35 knots of wind, and this goes in a counterclockwise circle. The barometer shows low, 992. On the right side, you can see the bars are not quite as tight together, the circles, as on the left, and you have gale warnings versus on the left is the developing storm conditions. So you have right side 35 knots pretty much sustained in the entire area. Once again, you have a low and it's counterclockwise going. You also notice that you have a cold front that is heading down, and that's the line with the blue spikes, triangles, coming out from the gale force winds. You can look at grip files by going latitude, longitude, and see wherever you want to go, what interests you. Generally speaking, I take a look at them 24 hours, 48 hours, just to see which direction they're moving and if any of these circles are loosening or if they become tighter and creating a bigger squeegee effect. Weather is our other um, category. It may be a sunny, cloudy, rainy, foggy, or reduced visibility kind of day. So there's a variety of little symbols that you can see on this slide. Is it snowing? Is it raining? Just drizzling, foggy, high wind, etc. Familiarize yourself with those, and it makes life a little bit easier, sort of like reading a book. Oh well, that kind of a day. Visibility looks pretty low. Seas are flat, a little bit of a small swell. We're prepared, got plenty of fuel, and we were heading out of cruise base. And another one of those kind of days. You see the current by the buoy. It is Crescent City. You can see the CR. We were heading out after having found refuge there. It's not uncommon on our trips north and south. We were prepared with binoculars just to see whether there were any crab pots or whatever else may be floating in the water, as obviously it is reduced visibility. This was taken at Coos Bay. We found this to be a good refuge for us because it was a wet, very wet day and we had to totally dry out. Although, as soon as we heard the fishermen 6 hours later departing, we made sure that we followed, and it was a good weather window for us as well to go up to the Pacific Northwest. The fourth component is waves and wave periods in seconds. This is a picture that I took from buoy weather, and you can see that, for example, Tuesday, we have some advisory going on. Wednesday the same. Thursday it is red. It is advisory conditions. So if you look, it is divided into morning and afternoon. But let's just take a look at the bottom here. You see northwest winds 22 to 30 knots. Pretty good stiff breeze. But now I look where the swells are coming from and the height, 8 feet at 9 seconds. That sort of makes an uncomfortable ride. I call it concave, as I prefer to have a 1 to 2 ratio, meaning like 7 feet at 14 seconds, or 1 to 2 is 5 to 10, 1 to 3 is even better, 3 feet at 9 seconds, and so on. You see the weather is progressing now. Seas on Thursdays are 9 feet at 7 seconds. 26 to 36 knots of wind. This is not a place that I would want to be out in the ocean. This is sort of like what I had shown you on windy with the flag and the conditions red that would show. I would start looking or plan on being in a harbor when I see these conditions as a forecast. And this picture, we were heading south from the Pacific Northwest. I believe it was 10-foot seas at about 10 seconds, 1-on-1 ratio. And what you see behind us, the following sea, was not Mount Shasta, but a crest. I would not want to turn around and face into these wind and sea conditions. Running with the weather is challenging enough. If you don't have a reliable auto helm, many of them cannot go downwind in conditions like such. Or if it occurs at night where you cannot see where the waves are coming from, it creates a fairly scary environment for many sailors. You may get pooped into your cockpit as well. And I think we actually had a wave visiting us just to see how we were doing. This was supposed to be a 48-second video of several hours reality. This was on our 56-day crossing with a variety of weather conditions, requiring much adaptations on all levels. It was loud, noisy, very wet, high seas. We had some gale force winds. Thank goodness it didn't happen for very long. I believe it was probably less than a day. And we all came out good, happy, and it was daylight, no complaints. Now, you don't need to be a wizard to understand that weather includes some form of navigation. Which brings us to our fifth components, tides and currents. This particular slide shows the planning for a tow from Emeryville to Sausalito and on to San Rafael. It is important to look at the tide. It is important to be aware of the current, whether you have the bucket or whether it pushes you. So if you know your speed and you know the distance that you have to go, you can now estimate where you will be at what point of the tides and the currents. For this, I use the formula 60D Street. So 60D Street is 60 minutes times the distance divided by the speed. It gives you how long it will take, the time. And you can do this equation in any way form. Whatever you have the question mark on will be 60 divided by and then times by. It's a great working formula. Another wonderful tool is your barometer. Your barometer reads pressure, indicating wind changes, speed or direction. You need to be physically at the location, of course. You monitor 6 hours on a regular basis, 6 to 12 hours, and write down what you're observing. Is it changing rapidly or slowly? A rapid change is generally not a good sign. Another tool you have is to look up at the high altitude clouds. Are they moving from left to right, indicating deteriorating weather conditions, or from right to left, which indicates generally improving weather conditions? In this slide, you can see visually that wind is caused by air flowing from high pressure to low pressure area. So in a high, it goes clockwise, and you see the barometer numbers, the readings are high. In the low pressure, you can see it goes counterclockwise, and you have numbers in the 900s. Here's a list of available weather resources. As we mentioned, the barometer. You have the radio, the newspaper, television as far as that goes, VHF radio, including the single sideband, and friends or fishermen. Here again, despite all the forecasting, the fact remains that the weather is what's outside of your porthole. And this is a saying, a quote from the late Don, who was famous for his colorful weather forecasting in Mexico. It brings to mind that one of our deliveries coming from Southern California to San Francisco, it was a delivery on a 37-foot Tiana not fancy outfit. Actually, we didn't even have a Dodger on this boat. According to the 24-hour forecast, we would have plenty of time to arrive in San Francisco. We were between, I believe, Monterey and Half Moon Bay. And all of a sudden, unlike the weather forecast, the conditions deteriorated and it was not nice. When we finally arrived, after being beat up at sea with no place to go, turnaround was not an option, as we were smack in the middle. When we arrived, all of the fishing boats were already in the harbor and informed us that all the charts and all the forecasts were off by 12 hours. We don't know why this phenomenon has occurred, but it just demonstrates that the weather is what's outside of your porthole. Weather sites. I will share with you in the next slide some weather sites, some that I use on a regular basis. Use them, practice, have fun, and it makes almost for perfect sailings. So here are the weather sites. There are the grip files. Pay attention to Zulu time or universal time. Windy.com, buoy weather. 2 days buoy weather is for free. The 7-day forecast, I believe, just went up in the last couple of months to, I believe, 10 days or so. I'm not sure. But that 4 out is not an accurate prediction anyway. It's just a guess. Your most accurate predictions are 3, max 4 days out. You can also find a conversion chart, greenwichmeantime.com, which is the Zulu time conversion table. Several people use and like passageweather.com. That is a free 7-day forecast. I use it sometimes, but not as often as number 1, 2, and 3, which is why you should be playing around with all the different sites and then choose the ones that you find comfortable with and that give you the best results in your forecast. And speaking of Zulu time, Greenwich Mean Time, take a look at your grip files. It is important information on the top right corner. This, for example, is 48-hour surface forecast, and there are 24-hour surface forecasts. You decide latitude, longitude at what you're looking at, but make sure that you make note of when it was issued. In this case, it was just before 6 p.m. Universal Time, and it is valid until 12 o'clock Universal Time 2 days later, April the 13th. So those are important notes to make and do your weather routing with. In addition to paying attention to Zulu time, it is also important that you note whether your waves are measured in meter or feet. Ocean charts are usually in meters or fathoms. Regional charts are often or most likely in feet. Windy I use also all over, whether it is in the United States, inside the bay, or whether I'm guiding someone across the sea, or buoy weather. If you take a look at that, with 2 days free forecast or the subscription for $70 some, I believe they just went up a little bit in the price. It is well worth to have this combination and the insight for it. Now that you have heard all about this, stay safe, enjoy, practice, go out, and have fun with it.